Welcome to Fireside Chats with Erin, the reboot. I'm Erin Gowerlich, the president of the Canada Grains Council and your host. This podcast serves as a platform to explore grain sector priorities that reflect the council's work here at home and around the world. Together, we will discuss issues and ideas with policymakers and industry influencers. And today, I'm pleased to be joined by Teresa Babuscio, Corteva's Director for Government and Industry Affairs for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Before joining Corteva in 2022, Teresa worked at Bayer Crop Science and in the agricultural commodities trading sector, both at the EU and global level. Before working in the European landscape, Teresa was a university lecturer in Rome and in the United States on the topic of food law. Teresa is Italian, and she holds a PhD in food, agriculture, and environmental law, along with an executive education from the Melbourne Business School. She speaks English, French, Spanish, and I'm sure Italian. Teresa, thank you for stopping by for a fireside chat.
Hi, everybody.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Perfectly. You sound perfect.
Babuscio?
Babuscio.
And do you speak Italian?
Yes, parlo italiano.
Okay, that's a given, I suppose. It's lovely to meet you. I was thinking about and preparing for this conversation when I was in London a few weeks ago for London Grain Week, and that was the week following the European elections. And so, as you can imagine, there were many Europeans at the IGC conference talking about the outcome of the elections. And so I'm very grateful to have this conversation with you today because, as you know, Europe is an important trading partner for many Canadian commodities, an important market. But we're going to talk also a little bit about the important role that they play with respect to their global influence and the effect that that can have for Canadian agriculture and the sector in many countries around the world. But maybe before we get into the outcome of the European elections, Teresa, I would like to set the stage by inviting you to reflect for a moment on the conditions that have led to a significant shift in some of the proposed agriculture or agri-environmental policies in the European Union. For example, a number of farmer protests across the Union. The fear and the concern felt by European farmers ultimately led to the dismantling of many provisions that were included in the farm to fork strategy. So talk a bit about some of the conditions that have existed in the last few years so that listeners have a better appreciation for the impact that they may have had on the elections last month.
Yes, sure. Everything started in Germany in late 2023, where the farmers started protest, triggered by the cut of funds from the government for the fuel that the farmers use on farm. And then in Germany, from these protests, it generated a wider protest in Germany itself. And then it had immediately a domino effect across Europe. Protest assumed different forms, but the underlying reasons were all the same. High prices, completely complex regulatory environment when it comes to sustainability and environmental protection. And so the problems felt by farmers were all in common, but the protest had different forms. Like, for example, the one also triggered by the Ukrainian imports. Of course, we as a company, but also as a person, we condemn all form of violence, but we were very sympathetic with the farmers. Now, we need to see the protest of the farmers as the culmination of a miscontent that was boiling under the surface since a couple of years. Let me name a couple of reasons. First of all, the ambition of the Farm to Fork and of the Green Deal were issued at a time where the world and Europe were in a completely different place. The Farm to Fork and Green Deal were published pre-COVID, And especially in the European continent, the farm to fork was issued before the Russian invasion to Ukraine. So the world and Europe was completely different, number one. Number two reasons, I would say, is that the farm to fork and the Green Deal were issued very much top down. So the outgoing commission did not bring farmers and interested stakeholders around the table to hear what was feasible and what was not, and related consequences. And this top-down approach was very much felt by the farmers along the ways, while the world and Europe was changing and the farmer had to cope with COVID, disruption of supply chain, and a war in the east border of the continental Europe. So the farmer protest, in the essence, triggered in the immediate a relaxation of what we call environmental rules in the common agricultural policy. Yes, these were immediately modified. They are called GAEC, but they are the environmental prescription in order for the farmers in Europe to receive direct payment. But what led to the, forgive me for this word, but to the failure almost of the ambition of the farm to fork was, let's say, cooking already since a couple of years.
Thank you for that, Teresa. That boots on the ground perspective, that's critically important, I expect, to the outcome of the election. So let's talk a bit about that. Now, the elections took place from June 6th to 9th in the EU. Tell us a bit about the results. And while you can't predict, I expect, what this means specifically for agriculture, can you give us some sense of where the ruling parties are at when it comes to the importance of issues for the agriculture sector, like trade and the environment?
Yes. So, first of all, we know what we know. And we don't know what we don't know. We are at the very beginning on what I call a 10-month journey, where we are gonna finally know what's gonna be the direction of the new constituency for the next 5 years. But how we can read the election, so the first step in this reshuffle of the political ecosystem in the EU. Besides the political colors and the numbers, I think that everybody has read the shift to the right of the European Parliament. Yes, it happened, although it happened in a proportion lower than expected. But still, we can say that the Parliament shifted to the right. What does it mean for agriculture and for the policy space in which agriculture operates? Couple of thoughts. First of all, the shift to the right indicates us that there may be more support to European farmers and farming. What does it mean? That we probably may find less dogmatic approach to policy making, but more a practical approach to it. For sure, we can say that if environment was front and center in the outgoing constituency, production, self-sufficiency, and agriculture are going to be back on the table and rebalance the environmental concern. I'm not saying that the ambition of the Green Deal is over, but production come to place when it comes to environmental protection. The second consideration that we may have is that being on the side of the farmers means also protecting their competitiveness in the European and the world market. What does it mean? It means that even if the trade ambition of the EU as important trade partner on the global stage will not go away, we should not expect a less protectionism like MRL, mirror clauses. I always like as a geek of food law and agriculture, being around since 17 years, I like always to summarize this concept by, if European farmers cannot use it, my peers in third countries should not have a competitive advantage either. And this, I would say, let's wait and see, but we foresee that this will not go away. I think that many have read the result of the election with the loss of seats for the Green Party. It's true in number, so we see a decrease, but that does not mean that the green philosophy will be less present and less impactful for several reasons. First of all, there are shadows greens in the political parties, even today, among and within the Renew, the centrists and the left, there are green politicians. Second, the Green Party will be, and this is what we read, will be essential to govern, because the two leading parties, the European People Party and the SD, the Social and Democrat, will need alliances in the parliament in order to get the majority. And I am not sure, we are watching with a lot of interest, especially because France goes to vote in the second turn this coming weekend. We need to see how those parties will see themselves sitting and exchanging with the far right. The third element is that there are 100 elected politicians without affiliation, and we need to see where they will go. They may go in the two leading parties, or they may join the Greens, but just to say that the Greens per se, even if they have voted, will stay there as needed in order to govern, and within also the other political parties. Policy making, and I'm concluding this first reading of the election, policy making will be, as I said, rebalanced. There will be agriculture, production, and environment on the same place. And probably we will see a less top-down approach from the European Commission. We may read the strategic dialogue that the President of the European Commission started in January, bringing to the table strategic dialogue on agriculture, bringing to the table the farming community and all interested parties as a lesson of an inclusive approach to policy making rather than top down.
I want to get to the farmers' reaction to the election results, but before I do, we've got the French election this weekend.
Yes.
So I've been reading that Le Pen is likely to win. Is that correct? In which direction are the polls going? And what outcome would that have in your view, both for agriculture from our perspective, but also in the European context?
Yes. So when it comes to poll and prediction, we normally are very prudent because exactly because they are prediction. The first result of the past weekend, I mean, this can be read in the press, gave the French citizen have spoken loud. Now, for the far right, Le Pen really has the chance to go to the government, but it has to be seen in which proportion, qualified absolute majority or not. It must be seen, but it will remain a component of the French result. And to be very honest, we are also very prudent when it comes on what might mean for us or for agriculture. We always prefer to wait the final poll. I think that you can understand the final poll before making our assumption on what's next. However, if I may add something that may be interesting for the audience, coming back to the European landscape, the parliament election is only one step of the next direction of the EU. The parliament is one body that has to have a view on policy making, and the initiative comes from the Commission. Now, the top jobs, like they are called, Commission President, President of the Council, President of the Parliament, Foreign Minister, have been already nominated. Ursula, the current president, is running for a second term, and the four top jobs have been already named. Now the Parliament will have to vote on them. Normally, it's going to happen, if no surprises, before the summer recession. Then, once we are back in town in September, the elected president of the Commission will nominate the commissioners, so the portfolio, her team or his team. And then the commissioners will have to go through hearing in the parliament. And this normally happens towards the fall. And if everything goes well, normally the team, so the next College of Commissioner, is in place before the Christmas break in order to be fully operational with the new year. Normally, what I always say internally and with peers, we should expect the next Green Deal, or like some are calling it, Green Growth Deal, in the first quarter of 2025. Competitiveness of production will be front and center of the next commission. Yes.
Okay, I appreciate some insight into the European process, because this is all still very new to me, and we're gonna take a deeper dive on that. I want to ask you a couple of questions with respect to process and what we can expect, and perhaps we'll have a second conversation again in the fall, Teresa.
Yes.
But before we do that, I really want to get a sense of the farmers' reaction to the election outcomes. Have we heard from the ag associations across the bloc?
I think that, like everybody in town, in Brussels, any sector is waiting for the completion of the process. For sure, the farmers, of course, the Farmers Association don't have a political colors. But what we have seen is that they continue to bang on the same drums, on the fact that they need to have tools to produce, they need to have innovation. So I think that the farmers are still campaigning for any color, because we are not here into politics, but for what they need to survive and to produce for the European citizen.
Thank you. You touched a bit on the relationship between the European Commission and the European Parliament. I'd like to maybe better understand the decision-making process between the two, and perhaps a relevant example for our audience might be with respect to maximum residue limits, when we saw more recently a related recommendation that came from the Commission was ultimately rejected by Parliament. So give us some insights, if you wouldn't mind, into the two bodies and the way in which they interact.
Yes. So to make it catchable for non-European, I know we live in a very complex environment, both in primary legislation. Think about new genomic techniques, so the big policy files, as well as implementing measure, what we call secondary legislation. The Commission has always the initiative. And so when it comes to the MRL, the Commission, on the basis of the scientific opinion of EFSA, makes a proposal. And it's very straightforward, because it's science-based, it has the number, so the Commission and EFSA proposal are quite straightforward. Like in any primary or secondary legislation, the Parliament needs to give an opinion, has a say. And when it comes to MRL, the Parliament indeed has been using the veto. Now, the veto, what we call a veto from the Parliament or objection, we and together with the industry, believe that they are not science-based, but they respond to sometime precautionary approach, political circumstances, or even maybe beliefs in certain angle. And the danger here is that what happens in the bubble at Brussels level may spill over and mirrored at member state level. And this is something that we continue to educate our stakeholders, that any MRL is not a safety threshold, but it's a trading threshold, that it's needed to continue to trade and to have and cultivate relations with our trading partners. So our job, our as Corteva, as well as of our industry association, won't rest with the new parliament. Rest assured about that.
Is it fair then to say, Teresa, and I may be oversimplifying this, that we can expect that perhaps there's a more pragmatic or science-based approach taken by the Commission with respect to their decision, whereas with the Parliament, there's obviously going to be that political influence?
Yes, I would say the Parliament is a political body. So the Commission is the risk manager after EFSA, and then the Commission needs to put management of the risk in place. And therefore, what we see is a much more straightforward approach. And then there are politics coming into play. Yes, you summarized very well.
I require a very basic understanding of the system. And EFSA, just for our listeners, EFSA, European Food and
Safety Authority, is
Authority.
Yeah.
How does that function within the Commission?
Okay, so EFSA is what we call an agency of the European Union, and it has the overall accountability and responsibility of risk assessment. If you think about our general food law in Europe, has 3 pillars: risk assessment, EFSA, risk management, Commission, risk communication. I always continue to say that it's always a bit up in the air, because who is responsible for risk communication? We believe that it's everybody accountability to contribute to the communication of risk versus hazard, which is another point very dear in Europe. But the EFSA basically gives the output from a scientific perspective. EFSA is made up of scientists, all scientific talents. Then the outcome, the scientific opinion, goes to the European Commission. So the services, the staff of the European Commission, who comes up with a decision that then is brought forward to the 27 member states, voting into the standing committee. So it's a regulatory body made up of 27 member state authorities. And that's how, if you want, an MRL gets out from the risk assessment and risk management, and then goes into the political part in the European Parliament.
Fantastic description. Thank you very much. I now have a much better appreciation for why those decisions are not always necessarily aligned. It makes sense. And we have some of the same challenges, although we have a very different system in Canada, many of the same challenges here in Canada with respect to what is the political response and who is responsible ultimately for that communication. So let's move beyond policies within the EU and talk a bit about the EU's attempt to influence policies in other jurisdictions, because my experience has been that this was something certainly with the previous parliament and its makeup that was critically important to them. So the Brussels effect, if you will, and there you are in Brussels now. Talk to us a bit about that, because the EU has increasingly sought to become the international standard setter, and especially as it relates to environmental policies, now advancing their own priorities or ambitions through multilateral forums like the WTO.
Yes.
So first off, is that an accurate assessment in your experience? This is an outsider looking in. And if so, what impact will the results have, do you think, from this election on the approach that the EU has taken thus far?
So thanks for the question, and your assessment is fair. I would say it's fair. We were also very well aware that the green diplomacy, how it was called, was an ambition of this outgoing commission. We have seen the advocacy of the commission in action to inspire its standard across the world. MRL is one of the applicant, but just the fact that it was raised 33 times in the WTO, it gives a sense on how instead the trading partner received it on the other side. I am not sure, let's wait and see again whether the Commission will have again this ambition. I believe that this incoming Commission will have domestic issues to solve. First, productivity, what it is called strategic autonomy, the war and the competitiveness, the boost to competitiveness, first of all. But as I said before, the political parties that will now form the European Parliament will tend to protect the EU competitiveness on the global market. So we will continue to share with our stakeholders, domestic stakeholders, that anything that comes into place in Europe has an effect towards trade, and therefore that a consistent consultation, dialogue with trading partner needs to continue and needs to happen. Europe is also a big exporter. We always say that, even if we are an input industry, so we are very far from the end of the chain, but as applying a little bit of common sense, we also say, yes, Europe is an importer, but is also a net exporter of added value product, processed product. So trade is always two ways.
Excellent. Okay, it's going to be very interesting to see how this conversation plays out in the coming months. So I'd like to switch gears for a moment before I let you go. This has been a very insightful conversation with respect to what's happening in the EU right now, and I look forward maybe to a follow-up in the fall as things settle. Let's dive in for a moment into a topic of particular interest to Canada Grains Council. It's one we've been watching very closely in the EU and would really appreciate an update in terms of where you think things are going. So this is around the adoption of a regulatory framework. I don't know if I'm using the right language, if it's a regulatory framework with respect to gene editing, or as you refer to it in the EU, new genomic techniques. What would you, is that what's being proposed essentially? Is it a regulatory framework?
We call it the policy framework. It's it's a policy framework.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we saw the final push for this in June, I'm assuming right before the election. The EU Council voted on the regulations or the policies related to the new genomic techniques, but they were unfortunately not successful. So what happens now?
Allora, thanks for this question. This is right at the core of Corteva, but also right at the core of professionals like me who are around since almost 20 years and have seen the farming community in Europe without the necessary technology to produce and to compete to turn it on the global market. You rightly said the new genomic techniques proposal was issued exactly 1 year ago, the 5th of July. So today is the 4th, the 5th of July from the Commission. Very good proposal, not perfect, but a good proposal that if remaining like this could enable innovation into Europe. The Parliament expressed its opinion on it, an opinion again, and did not signal enormous problem besides a couple. What needed to happen before the election was the so-called general approach of the European Council. formed of 27 member states. So the process is the Commission proposes, the Parliament gives an opinion, the Council also needs to give an opinion, which can be closed via general approach. In the room, I would say, even if member states were not fully convinced of one aspect or another one, we had the number in the room to close before the 30th of June and to launch the so-called trilogue. The trilogue is where the three institutions who have expressed an opinion, so Commission, Parliament and Council, deal with the controversial point, negotiate the trilogue, negotiate about the pending points. And this was not possible to reach because the general approach was not reached in the Council. One member state did not come along. You need 16 member states representing altogether 65% of the population. So it's easy counting. So now what happens is that the proposal as it is will go will stay in the Council because we still have one body who needs to express an opinion. Will move under the Hungarian presidency, who will try to bring this to the finish line in the Council. Now, the risk that we see is that so far Europe has managed to have a fair proposal, science-based, but maybe less precautionary, more realistic and science-based. We risk that other topic will come to the table, topic that so far have been Pacific, because there was only one topic to discuss, but we may see the risk to restart all over again. Of course, this is not what we wish. We will continue as a Corteva and as an industry to advocate for science-based, enabling, proportionate, future-proof legislation. And we need to see and work with the coming presidency to make it happen.
There's a chance, Teresa, that the proposed policy could be scrapped and we could be starting over again.
It's too soon to say. It's too soon. It's too soon to say. It's too soon to say. We have already seen that the Hungarian presidency has put the NGT, as we call it in acronym, on their agenda. We need to work with all interested parties to really steer the conversation along the same direction the Commission initiated and the Spanish and the Belgian presidencies continued. Again, science-based, proportionate, future-proofing in order to enable innovation in the EU. EU risks to remain once again behind otherwise.
Okay, you and I will stay in touch on this one. Clearly,
yes.
you're there
yes.
on the ground watching and influencing the outcome of this conversation.
Yes.
So maybe more specifically with respect to a Canadian perspective on this, herbicide-tolerant crops are critically important for sustainability in Canada, and yet herbicide-tolerant traits are not recognized as sustainable under the EU's proposed NGT framework. How do we bridge the gap in your view?
Yeah, so this is a very sensitive topic, as you can imagine, also from a societal perspective. Now, as a Corteva, I can say that we are well aware that weed control is an important topic, and we stand by the farmers in order to provide tools in order to combat weed. However, we are also very much aware that at least in Europe, a large part of the society has expressed concern when it comes to herbicide tolerance. Now, we need to wait and see, but do not, my recommendation is to not only look at sustainability with the lens of genomic techniques, so NGT, and how NGT would qualify or not herbicide tolerance bred seed, but there are other parallel legislation like PRM or other that could eventually bridge the gap. Now, again, herbicide tolerance was a very hot topic also during the discussion on NGT, but I believe that many stakeholders have made clear that this is a sensitive topic and they didn't want to, let's say, mix the two, seeing the chance of NGT on one side and bringing to the table the discussion on herbicide tolerance. Many stakeholders have felt that we're going in that direction. The risk to endanger the chance of NGT was too big to try to solve this other problem. I am sure we have a new commission, we have a new constituency, we have a parallel legislation that touch upon sustainability of seeds as well. I'm sure there will be space to bring this conversation back.
Appreciate your perspective on that. PRM, what is that, Teresa, you mentioned?
So PRM is a piece of legislation on seeds that for the time being is stalled because we have had election that will basically modernize all pieces of legislation on seeds that are floating around in Europe since many years.
Okay, thank you. My final question to you, this has been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate your time. The grain trade and life science sector both acknowledge the benefits for food security when trading partners employ science-based and consistent approaches for NGTs. You've worked in both sectors.
Yeah.
Do you see opportunities for further collaboration on this point?
As you said, I worked on both sides, and the grain trade is still very dear to my heart, I have to say. Absolutely, for many reasons. First of all, we are the input industry and the grain trade. We are the closest sector to the farmers. We come right before, the grain trade comes right after. No one can do this alone. So absolutely, yes. And I know that in the past, the relations have not always been roses and flowers, as we say in Italian, but I think that everybody in the community learned some lesson, and I see a more positive, constructive, even in the differences, attitude and dialogue. What I can tell you is that the sector, our industry associations, so at all levels, have a dialogue and a partnership with the local grain trade or with International Grain Trade Coalition, the IGTC. And as a Corteva, we have a direct partnership with some of the grain trading companies in order to bring on the market added value product for food, feed, and fuel.
Thank you, Teresa. This has been an excellent conversation. Appreciate your perspective on this and a lovely opportunity to meet you.
Likewise, this has been fantastic. And if we want to follow up in the fall, count on me. I'm all up for it.
Wonderful. I hope you found this episode as thought-provoking and inspiring as I did. Remember, these fireside chats with Erin are monthly, so mark your calendars. We will be back in August with another great conversation. Stay connected with us for more engaging conversations that delve into the heart of the grain industry. You can catch us on your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Just search for Fireside Chats with Erin and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next time.